wonderful to be with you here to help close out this incredible first day that we have had, to explore what can we do to bring transformation back to our organizations. We've already started the conversation with Peter earlier today about the meta-trends that are suggesting that the world we are in right now and will continue to go into is very different than where we are right now. So I'm absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to go deeper with the three speakers that you just heard and invite another so we can make this real, so we can really delve into the choices that we can bring back to our organizations. I'm passionate that these skills are teachable and learnable. This is what I do every day in my work, teaching futures and design thinking, both at Singularity University and at Stanford at the D School. So please join me in welcoming our fellow panelists that we'll have this conversation with. I'd like to invite Ricardo Vargas to join us to the stage. He's the executive director of Brightline. Thanks so much, Ricardo. And I'd also like to invite back Charlene Lee, John Hagel, and Nick Davis. Come on by. So I'm going to try to keep this super real on this panel. We've had a chance to listen to some of the great research and work you've been doing, and I want to start with you, Ricardo. We haven't had a chance to learn from you yet. You do wonderful work at Brightline, trying to reimagine how work gets done, empowered by technology, but fundamentally about people. And you come to this work from doing transformation work at the ground level, doing work with the UN and in refugee camps. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing and how you see transformation play out at that level.
Yeah. So what I can say is when we think about transformation, many people may think, okay, one of the roadblocks of transformation is money or is it technology? And I can tell you, based on our research and of course my experience, it's all about people. And when I say people, many of you say, Ricardo, this is absolutely obvious. You're talking about people. And I'm not talking here about motivating people, inspiring people. This is, of course, something you should do. But I'm talking about bringing people along with you. So transformation is something, if you are a senior executive here, that you cannot outsource. It's your responsibility to drive people forward and bring them together. And I'm not saying this because this is something nice to say. It's because if people inside your organization, if they don't become your volunteer army to drive things, if they don't see that there is something for them in that, they just don't move. And I can tell you a very practical example. Let's go back to 2014, when I was for almost 5 years the global director for project management and infrastructure at the United Nations. We were in Haiti after the earthquake in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Port-au-Prince called Fort National. And it was devastated. Most of the people living in absolutely misery and in cartoon tents, for years. And we got funds from a foundation to build homes. And what is the logical thing you do? You hire a construction company, you go there, you build, and you give the keys to them, right? And then we started doing that. When we arrived there with the workforce and saying, look, folks, we need to build a house here. They said, we don't leave. And I say, why you don't leave? And say, no, we don't leave because this 2x2 square of land is all that I have left in life. I don't know if I leave and come back next week, someone will not take. I don't leave. So what we had to do in order to bring them on that, this is just a simple, we hired them instead of an external company. We hired 1,000 people every single month. So we brought them to the work. We sold the idea to them of having a new home for them and for their neighbors. We brought the money to that society. We developed that community. We got their support. And with that, we built hundreds of houses by doing that. You cannot bring a contractor and say, okay, good, do the work and deliver to them. You need to engage them. And I think this is one of absolutely the key topics if you want to make transformation happen.
I so appreciate that, Ricardo. And it really ties into something that Charlene was talking about around the importance of empathy and the importance of deep listening. And Charlene, you talked about in the context of your customers, knowing what they are and having a customer map. But I think Ricardo's point is thinking about empathy on behalf of the people within your organization that need to transform. Right? It can be easy for all of you coming here, Silicon Valley, learning about the future and technologies, and what's happening to all the people that are not here. They're worried that you're going to go back with a totally new idea that's going to change everything they thought that they knew about their job. So Charlene, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the importance of empathy as it relates to culture and relates to transformation.
Well, I think I talked about it from the customer's point of view, but I think empathy is one of the hidden superpowers that people naturally have, and we don't think that we can be empathetic. But if you think about the changes that had to happen inside an organization, I think about in particular the frozen middle, the middle managers. Executives love it, the frontline people love it, the middle people hate it, because their jobs are going to completely fundamentally change. Their power came from being a gatekeeper, and now information flows all over the place. So having empathy for how they think about the world, I think in many ways is absolutely crucial, because unless you do, they will become the permafrost. Nothing will move. It's just completely frozen. So having that empathy, understanding how they think about things, how do they think about their place and their relationship to the rest of the organization? They're no longer gatekeepers. How they became facilitators?
Yeah.
And by having that and saying, how do they rethink their jobs? Essentially the same jobs, but a very different outcome that really in many ways breaks through that ice.
I think you bring up such a good point about language, right? And about making ideas visible with language and with form. And I really appreciated your perspective around connecting beliefs and behaviors as fundamental to your culture and having congruency before them, right? If you say that you care about your customers, then you have to do some of the work that Ricardo was saying around going out and really listening and caring for your customers. I also think, John, that ties into a big point that you made around the transformation to ecosystems and platforms, which is enabling learning in a different kind of way. I mean, what Charlene and Ricardo are talking about is discovering new knowledge about employees and about customers in a different way. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how we create cultures of learning and who's responsible for learning in that context.
No, in our view, it is a fundamental transformation that's going to be required in all our institutions. Our belief is our institutions today are driven by a model of what we call scalable efficiency, and that the key is how do you build a model of scalable learning in our institutions. And it challenges every aspect, and I'll just give one example in terms of leadership. What's the mark of a strong leader in a scalable efficiency institution? It's the person who has all the answers. No matter what question, you can count on the leader to have the answer. And by the way, if they don't have the answer, maybe it's time to get rid of them and get somebody who does have the answers. That's scalable efficiency. In a scalable learning world, our belief is the mark of a strong leader is the one who has the most powerful questions and who will freely admit they don't have the answers, and even more importantly, ask for help. Say, can you help me? This is really an important question. If we could figure this out, we could accomplish amazing things. And it builds by sharing vulnerability at the leadership level. It builds trust. You know, I think one of the issues, just a bit of an aside, but one of the issues today, if you look at the surveys that are done, is trust is eroding in all our institutions. Every institution, companies, governments, media, you name it. Why? I think one reason is because we have leaders of those institutions who say they have all the answers. And we know there are only two possibilities. One is they're clueless about the changes that are occurring in the world and think they have the answers but don't, or they're lying to us. In either case, trust goes way down. Yep. So I think that's key.
I think that the way that leaders show up as learners is so fundamental, and I encourage all of you to think about a leader that you know of or that you think of in your organization or that you watch who demonstrate great learning capabilities. And you can see that. You can see that, for example, Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb, one of the first things he did was create a personal advisory board to help him learn about all of the things he didn't quite know. Or Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates, who are voracious readers that are constantly showing how they are learning and modeling that as a prized behavior, which again connects beliefs and behaviors. I know that my mom, who's watching this right now, is a chief learning officer for 25 years, is very happy about the idea of exponential learning. And it's really a challenge to all of you to say, who is responsible for learning in your organization? Is it just your chief learning officer, which tends to work in the back officer? Because if that's the case, then you have an opportunity based on John's wisdom to say learning is all of our responsibilities. What are we doing to foster questioning as part of our culture? And I think, Nick, this comes back to some of the things you shared with us on your research around innovation mindsets and how important it is to have congruency in the organization. And you talked about innovation theater, which I think is rampant. This idea where a leader comes back and says, we're going to be innovative, and everything stays the same. Right. I sometimes call that the audio-video disconnect, right? That yes, we want to change, but actually nothing suggests that we really want you to change. So what have you seen work to overcome that? I mean, how do people get aligned around really being willing to do some of these changes that we've been talking about?
Yeah, for me, the alignment question is a huge one. An example I often tell is we were working with a financial services company last year, and we had them down to a program here on campus. And we had one of our quantum faculty members talking about the future and robo-advisors and the impact of their business. And we got to the end of the talk, and we asked the question, who believes that future is the reality, right? You have the CTO, the CIO, and the executive leadership team for all of technology for this very large Fortune 50 brand. Everyone agreed that that future was pending, right? We all believe that this future with a robo-advisor for our business is going to happen. When was the next question, and not one human in the room agreed on when. And you can imagine if you're trying to lead a global organization through this time of disruption and transformation, and none of you agree on the outcome of when we should start working or when we're too far behind, it makes it extremely difficult for any person or any executive or any leader to navigate that change as a group. And so for us, it really starts to say, do we believe that this is the future ahead for us? How can we lean into creating it? And then ultimately, how do we get alignment so we're all running at the same speed? Because when we get out of tune with each other is when you can fall.
I could not agree with that more. I actually wrote a book entirely about these kinds of strategic conversations, and we found that there were different kinds of conversations. There were conversations around building understanding, this alignment, conversations around shaping options, what should we do, and conversations around making decisions. And we're so wired for action and movement that we forget about that first category. We move quick into the exciting, shiny new options that we try to implement, and then everything falls apart, and we wonder why it didn't work. So, Nick, your point about slowing down to get real shared understanding about why we're doing what we're doing, what it might look like, and what's really motivating the change is absolutely so critical. And so, Ricardo, I want to bring it back to you because I think some of the work you're doing now around using technology and exponential technology to really unleash human potential and moving some of this transformation forward is really groundbreaking. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about how you see that connection between technology really unleashing the human potential.
Yeah, I think that technology, what we can see here, and I think all of us will agree, I was on the public scene, is that it's amazing what is going on. But at the same time, it's frightening what is going on, right? I had a discussion in our mood panel down talking about people living 200 years, and one of our colleagues said, I think this will happen in the next 10 years. And I say, are you sure? And then there is all this, and imagine all the impact of that. So what we need to understand, and one thing that why I'm talking a lot about people and bringing people together is that we need to have the awareness that people don't follow Moore's law. Machines follow. Machines become faster and faster. But I'm saying not we, maybe we here, 1,000, 2,000 people, we are not the world. We are just the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg. We are talking about billions of people that have no clue of what we are talking about here. And these people, imagine how they feel about what is going on in very simple things. When we spoke about, I was talking to some colleagues about Uber, and see the main challenges of Uber are not necessarily the technology. The technology is there. But what do you do with unhappy drivers? What do you do with regulators? What do you do with taxi drivers? What do you do with them? It's not improving the GPS location so I can find you in one. This is not the core of the problem. The problem is much bigger. So what we are trying now to connect is how we can connect these technologies and the advancements of technology to provide a shared future and a better future for everyone, so we can bring together everybody. Everything we see, this is my personal belief, everything that we see today in the world on the politics and this, it's generated by the disruption we are seeing. Because a lot of people is moving, but a lot of people is falling behind. And this is what is creating this disparity between extremists. And how we can reduce this gap and bring more people along. And this is one of the key aspects of our study today.
It's a great tee up for something I know John is very passionate about, around creating a positive narrative, around really making sure that we can see the future and it pulls us. And John, I can't believe your book is 10 years. And if you have not read Power of Pull, put that on your list. But if you could talk a little bit about why you're so passionate about positive narratives.
Yeah, it starts with the fact that throughout my business career, I've basically been a business strategist. It's been all about strategy. And over the years, I've come to believe that it's much less about strategy and much more about psychology. And that if we don't understand the emotions that are driving us, and by the way, start with yourself. What are the emotions that are really driving you? And dive deep. Don't just take the surface emotions. You'll never accomplish what you want to accomplish. And in that context, I'm struck, I travel around the world, and I've struck over the past several years of the increasing amount of fear as the dominant emotion that I feel across the world. And I think it's understandable given the rapid change and the mounting pressure. There are a lot of reasons to be afraid. But I think if we let that fear build, it's going to lead to very bad outcomes. And in that context, to get to the question about narratives, I've become a big proponent of a very specific kind of narrative. Most people use stories and narratives to mean the same thing. I believe that stories are basically self-contained. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And a story is about me, the storyteller, or it's about some other people. It's not about you. In contrast, the way I think about narratives are open-ended. There is no resolution yet. There's some kind of big opportunity or threat out in the future, not clear whether it's going to be achieved or not. And the resolution of the narrative hinges on you. It's a call to action to say you can and you need to make a difference. And I think one of the things that's feeding the fear around the world is more and more of our political environment, and I don't hold any side more or less guilty. I think all sides have fallen on what I call threat-based narratives. The enemy's coming to get us. We're all going to die. We need to mobilize now and resist. I was right to be afraid. The enemy's coming to get me. It feeds the fear. Who is articulating an opportunity-based narrative that says, if we all came together, what amazing things could we accomplish together? My belief is that's the key to moving us from fear to hope and excitement. And if we don't do that, we're in deep trouble. So that's why I'm so passionate about opportunity-based narratives.
I think it's so important, and yes, I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Charlene shared some really exciting examples of how organizations can give form to an opportunity-based narrative in the form of, you talked about the power of a manifesto. And then I think one step further, and my passion is design, which allows us to give form to those ideas in ways that trigger positive responses, is how those then get translated so that they can support a culture. So you talked about the orange code and these signals, even the dress. So I wonder if you could share a little bit more about how we can take some of the premise of an opportunity-based narrative and think very practically about what are some ways we can embody that and some ways that we can then signal that to our colleagues, to our customers, and other ways that can get them excited.
Yeah, I think in many ways I'm channeling John because the opportunity-based narrative is that future customer. It's embodiment of that. And the reason why I love that as the narrative, so to speak, is that people can understand that and see it. And the hard part is organizations do not take the time to figure out, I mean, how many people know who their future customer is here? You know, we just don't.
Hold on one second. How many people know their current customer is, right?
Let alone
Which is,
future customer.
Right, which we actually take for granted. So
Exactly.
yes.
And so I think in many ways, the way to do this is to constantly ask as the leader, so what are we working towards? We love to ask why, I mean, to work on purpose statements and everything, but it's too high level. We need to break it down into these really tangible bits. So I talked a little bit about some of the ways to do this, but I think of organization, how do you organize yourself to be oriented towards the opportunities? Because it's not just around the organizational silos, but how will we actually work together? The process of how you actually do this. How do you take a learning of a customer from the edge when you identify them and bring it back into the organization? And that's where I think AI and all these other new technologies to be able to make sense of all of that huge amounts of information and turn your organization into a sensing organization of all these opportunities. And then finally, the last part, the symbols, the lore is what I call it, the mythology, built around the stories, the symbols, and then the rituals. The rituals are so important. So I look at those kind of factors, the organization process, but also the lore, as areas where companies can really start pulling these levers to change their culture to be more opportunity-oriented.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I mean, one theme across many of the conversations we heard earlier was this sort of paradox between thinking big and having clarity about purpose, but then being able to translate it down to a small behavior. And that's a lot of altitude to cover, right? So you have to have clarity on that, and you have to think about, well, how does that then translate into this small choice I can make so that others can make it too? And I think that is the secret to maybe unlocking scalable learning. And that really brings us back, Nick, to a point you made around the explorer's mindset, which again can be so tricky when we have calendars that are filled with meetings and meetings and meetings. Like when do you do your exploring? Like 11 o'clock at night when you finally got through all your email? I mean, we have to build that in. Can you share some strategies that you've seen working with organizations about how they bring exploring to the table, whether they bring new ideas in or they go on learning journeys, or what are some sort of approaches?
Yeah, I mean, for the work that we're doing, it's probably a multi-pronged approach ultimately. And so, for us, we're using narrative to go build sci-fi stories. And so we do a lot of sci-fi design intelligence work. There's a workshop on that tomorrow. And that's allowing us to start to build that future vision with our clients so they can gain that alignment that I was talking about. But that's just one step, right? We're just starting to see a phase where now 10, 15, 20 years out, we have a shared common understanding of the future that we're trying to build. But then now what, right, ultimately? And for us, what we're doing is we'll bring it back to the lab and we'll start actually running sprints and prototyping around what can we be building today to realize that far off future, and how do we start to build that muscle? And so a question I'll get often is, like, when do we begin, right? And what we'll tell our clients is it's probably going to fail a lot in the beginning, but the main point is, can you start to catch that speed, right? Because the really difficult thing is if you start to fall too far behind, you're ultimately not going to be able to catch up, right? There's a point of no return with an exponential curve where it starts to kind of get away from you. And so for us, it's that, as John says often, the zooming in and zooming out, back and forth, for us to be able to help our clients understand with sci-fi what the next phase looks like. What am I going to build for? And then bringing it back to today to run really quick sprints to realize that future.
Yeah, which again speaks to that rigor, right? Because a sprint is actually rigorous. There's rules, there's standards to unleash the learning and the creativity. And again, Ricardo, I want to come back to you around your real focus on project management as this kind of almost like fulcrum to unleash possibilities that we might not have existed, leveraging technology.
Yeah, I think project management, and I'm talking in a very broad sense of project management. So everything you do to connect ideas to reality is what we are talking about. So we are not talking about just planning, executing, control like a more traditional way, but all the things you need to do to get ideas from reality is what we are talking about, project economy or project delivery. And this is the key aspect of bringing things to reality. And what I said here last time, and I want to repeat, I'm not saying that having ideas and innovation is easy. It's not. It's a massive work. But getting things real is where the benefit is. So where the benefit for your organization, for your society, is when you turn that idea into something tangible. And the only way of doing that is starting working on it. It's starting developing your MVPs and bringing people along, reducing the resistance and moving on. At some point you need, because you know what I really struggle sometimes when I see people saying, oh, let's change the world, and then you present a super nice PowerPoint and say, oh, and so what? Okay, and so what? So what we'll do in reality, very down to earth. And I had this experience at the UN because, you know, sometimes you just receive a memo from the Security Council saying, oh, let's build a refugee camp, that. And say, do you have an idea of what does it take to do that? Do you think it's what? It's just, okay, put a tent there and do that for 150,000 people? It's not like that. It's far more complex. It's social. So we need to get real. And only by experimenting and doing that, we can build one thing. And I want just to make one final point. John, you said one thing that I really just love, this opportunity mindset and this positive mindset. And I'm absolutely on that. One thing that is important, it must be authentic. People are not dumb. People know when you're not being honest with them. And this will act on the opposite. So you need truly to be passionate and believe on what you want to do. Because it's not just by saying, because it's very easy to come here and say in a very motivational way what we should do, but you need to really feel that passion. Because otherwise you don't get there. People don't buy and don't go with you.
Right, which contributes to the trust breakdown that John was just talking about. Absolutely. John, you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that one of the things that I talked about zoom out, zoom in as a strategy, and that's my strategy hat on. Let me shift and talk about it from a psychological viewpoint. The key value of a zoom out, zoom in strategy is, on the one side, the long term, it focuses on a big opportunity, an inspiring opportunity that can help us overcome our fear and really get inspired and motivated to act. And it's, I think that too many companies that I see today are focused on driving change through a threat-based narrative. You know, if we don't do this, we're going to die. Well, I think the most powerful way to motivate people is with opportunity. But to the point, the power of the zoom out, zoom in is the zoom in side demonstrates the authenticity. We are committing a critical mass of resources in the next 6 to 12 months to get tangible impact. This is not just words and PowerPoint slides. This is real. We're committed. And I think that's powerful. It overcomes the skepticism that people and fear that people naturally have, that these are just words and fantasy.
Well, I think the other thing that it does is that it actually, you start to shape the future by creating evidence that you can get there. I mean, you're creating your own pull towards there. And I think, you know, in addition to the threat-based to create urgency to do something, is we get reliant on what we know and what we see. We get comfort in numbers. When in fact, so much of this work, and just playing back some of the language I heard from you earlier, is around courage, around taking risks, around leaping, around imagination. Where's the number score on imagination? So we have to actually invent these new metrics on learning, on return on humans. Let's create that as a metric so that we can start to pull and build momentum to go forward. But Charlene, you wanted to add something there.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts is, to Nick's point, people, like, they hear this, they go, yeah, 100% agree. How do I get started? When do I get started? When am I ready? And I think it's a crisis of confidence in many ways. And because if I go out there and I fail, am I going to be less credible? Is my leadership going to be called into question? And in the research that we've seen, what all of us are talking about is that your leadership credibility doesn't come from you being right all the time.
Yep.
Your leadership credibility comes from you being, and this is the research, being honest, being fair, being authentic. That's all people are asking you to do as a leader. And when you have confidence in that, and more importantly, in the relationship you have with people, we think about leadership as a title, and actually it's a relationship between people who aspire to lead and people who are inspired to follow them.
Right.
So I think in many ways, what I see the best leaders doing is they make the time. They set aside the time. You were asking before, how do you find the time to do this when your day is segmented into 15-minute segments? You're going for 12 hours a day. You can't. And what I found with the most disruptive leaders, their calendars are actually really open. They have half of their time blocked out to think about the future. And the pushback I get from it is like, well, how the house is burning down. How do I do this? This is about being a really good leader is, especially with large, complex organizations, you have the delegation. And the further up you go, the more time you're setting aside to think about these big strategic issues. Because if you don't, who will?
Yeah, it's so true. I don't have time to make time. One thing I often say is, take a look at your standing meetings. Your standing meetings, and ask yourself, what value are they creating? Is that the best use of our time? Could they get that information elsewhere? And what a gift you could offer your employees and your colleagues to say, I'm going to give you back that time. I'm going to give you back that time so that you can start to imagine, that you can think about the new initiatives that you might want to investigate to cultivate that explorer's mindset. So we are just about out of time, but I want to just end this wonderful conversation with maybe a last word of advice that you have to these leaders that came here to create the future. We have 2 days ahead of us of incredible learning, and just very quickly from each one of you, what's one lasting thought or suggestion you have to really maximize this moment of learning? Nick, I want to start with you.
Yeah, so for me, the common thing that we've been seeing with our clients all year has been speed, right? And it's probably an assumed thing that you would think for us, but ultimately that aligned decision making to be able to actually take action as fast as possible is the common thread that we've seen for the companies that are successful.
Yeah.
Can they get aware of what's going on around them, all the opportunities out in front, and can they make a collective decision and take action? And it's that speed of reaction that's separating the ones that are successful from not.
So it sounds like a healthy dose of going slow to go fast. Yeah, great. John.
I'll just build on my earlier comment. I think the thing I would ask all of you is not to focus on what you've learned, although that's important. It's focus on what's the one really big question that you come out of this with, and who can you connect with to start to drive an answer to that question.
Wonderful. Charlene?
I think the next 2 days are a really unique opportunity to create a safe space where you can be vulnerable. It's going to feel awful, but put your messy on the table. Tell people, this is what I'm working on. I don't know how to solve it. And be really vulnerable and authentic in that. And when other people are doing this around you, you'll get so much more out of the next 2 days.
Yeah, fantastic. And Ricardo?
And for me, I would go back to my first statement, is that we are accountable. So what is important is that after these 2 days, we need to go to our life and make an action, and make an action. Share what we learned, talk to people about what we learned, what we are making us afraid, and get real, because we are really privileged to be here. And there is a lot of people that will not have this access. So it's our obligation to go there and bring other people along.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I know Nick, John, Charlene, and Ricardo are all doing other things throughout these 2 days, so don't miss an opportunity to continue to learn from them.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.